All right, hello everyone. So we have one person at the moment, but I guess maybe some of them will come and join at a later time. So we're just gonna start anyways because our material will normally cover for about an hour. So welcome to the e-learning session for today. My name is Adli Wahid. I am a security specialist at APNIC. And our session today will be covering the topic of Computer Security and Incident Response Team, or CSIRTS. So this is a very easy introduction to CSIRTS, what they are, what they do, and why they are important in the security ecosystem of an organization. So just a little bit about myself. My name is Adli Wahid. I work as a security specialist at APNIC. I do a lot of security awareness, training, and engagement with APNIC members as well as other organizations. And as you will see, if you go to APNIC website, there's a lot of information about the security initiatives at APNIC. So we work with a wide array of audience, primarily network operators, but also organizations like APCERT, FIRST, Interpol, and many other organizations who are interested to improve and promote security. So our activities are along the lines of training. You find security tracks at our events, Apricot and APNIC conferences. And from time to time, we present at many security conferences there are out there. So if you want to know what we do at APNIC when it comes to security, feel free to visit our website at the URL on the slide that you are seeing now. Okay, so let's go into our presentation for today. So what I will cover in the next maybe 45 minutes to 1 hour are the following. So we'll take a look at cybersecurity in general, and then go and move into security incidents. After that, we'll look into why or what a CSIRT is and why they are needed. Then we talk about some policies, operation procedures, look into topics like how to collaborate or why it is important for the CSIRT or CERT to collaborate and interact with others. And of course, we learn more about the CERTs, and at the end of the presentation, I will have 2 scenarios that will hopefully enhance your understanding or your appreciation on the importance of having an incident response capability inside your organization. So during the presentation, if you have any question, you can just type it in the chat box. And I would also like to remind you that you can get this material at the URL that I just posted in the chat box. At the end of the presentation, I'd appreciate as well if you could fill up the survey that we have provided for you so that we can see where we can improve in the future. All right, so cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is definitely an interesting subject and becoming very important. I'm sure you are reading a lot of cybersecurity news and problems everywhere today on the internet. What is cybersecurity actually? So it's pretty much difficult to cover the topic in a very limited period. However, when we talk about cybersecurity, there are different perspectives. One is that cybersecurity is about addressing or ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information, of systems, of applications, and therefore, to ensure this 3 components or 3 qualities, we have to put security controls in place. we have to plan, we have to understand what we have in the organization that could be at risk. So, for instance, you have data, you have information, you have also assets, and also as an enterprise, you have requirements such as uptime and things like that. So, addressing the CIA can be seen as one aspect of cybersecurity. Now, cybersecurity can also be seen as part of risk management. So, an organization that is operating have a lot of risk: financial risk, environmental risk, right, business risk. And for an organization that relies a lot on IT or information technology, you have cybersecurity risk, right? So to deal with cybersecurity risk, you must understand what the threats are, right? So if you have an IT infrastructure, so you know that one of the threats is maybe a malware attack or malware infection on some of your computer system, or could be a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack on your servers, for instance. And these threats are pretty much non-threatening if there is no vulnerability, right? So if you have threats and vulnerability, then you have a risk that you have to manage. And the thing about risk management is many times organizations will have to deal with risk that are known to them and those that are unknown, things that are new, right? So therefore, when it comes to risk management, there's a whole science to this, and you look at your priorities, strategy with dealing with risk. How do you deal with them? Do you put in more controls? Do you outsource it to a different party, or do you just try to eliminate the risk from the very beginning by not using technologies that are vulnerable or technologies that you have no solid control or understanding upon, right? Also, when it comes to cybersecurity, you find that in today's world, many organizations have a cybersecurity program, which means that there are different areas that you must manage to have a strong defense or strong cybersecurity within an organization, right? And one of this area is, having an incident response capability. That is, after putting in place many of the security controls, you may have an incident, and therefore you must be able to respond to that. Because when you have an incident, if you don't deal with it immediately, and you don't deal with it correctly, then there is a risk, right? There is a possibility that this incident could spread and cause more damage to the organization, right? So having an incident response plan or having an incident response capability is very important. Now, so a bit more about cybersecurity, right? So it is also said that when implementing a cybersecurity program, you need to have a mix of everything, right? So you need people, you need resources, you need people who are aware of what the problems are. You need to have people who are talented, who are skillful in implementing cybersecurity controls, right? You also need processes and policies to be in place, right? So how do we deal with, for example, employees who are leaving the organization, because we don't want them to take away some of the confidential information about the organization, right? So how do we control that, for instance? How do we, secure confidential, how do we secure communication among us to ensure confidentiality? So, for example, if you need to share passwords with colleagues at the office, what's the procedure of doing that? What's the policy, right? How do we communicate with external parties, for example, in sharing information about threats and security incidents? So process and policies must be in place and must be understood so that you can implement your cybersecurity program. And last but not least, technology. So having the right technology to detect, to prevent, and to respond to a security incident is very critical. Now, a little bit more on cybersecurity. Security is not the ultimate. So security is an ultimate outcome of, doing a lot of things. So security is part of a process. It is a continuous approach. And part of this is, being able to learn from incidents that you may experience or incidents that other people have experienced, right? So I'm sure you have read news or articles about how organization X was breached, and as a result, a lot of data concerning customers' information and whatnot has been leaked, right? So you may wonder what went wrong, how did they get breached, and what did they do, to prevent further damage, right? So learning from incidents is part of this continuous approach of security implementation. And from time to time, because we adopt new technologies, changes in protocols, changes in application and how things work, right? We need to be able to be up to date on the best current practices. Right? My favorite example for this is the usage of username and passwords for authenticating oneself to a system, right? And today we hear of a technology called two-factor authentication. Right, and it is said that this is something that is very, very important, because it would eliminate the risk of having the password of the users disclosed. Right, so even if the password of the users has been disclosed or breached or stolen, and then there is another element for doing authentication. Right, so applying best current practices or understanding, what is out there, what needs to be done is also very critical in making sure that you have a solid cybersecurity program. And last but not least, we are not talking about all of this in silos, right? There's a lot of work being done already out there, talking about, cybersecurity framework, strategies, and so on and so forth. And this is all to make sure that organizations are prepared and that are ready to face, the risk or the threats in the cyber world. Now, let's go to the next section. So, what is a CSIRT? So, before we go and talk about CSIRT, let's talk briefly about security incidents. I'm sure I don't have to explain that much here, but basically, a security incident is a violation or imminent threat of security policies, acceptable use policies, and standard security practices. Let's go into some examples, right? So these are some of the examples that I have for you today. So an attacker sends a command to a botnet and send high volumes of requests to a web server, causing it to crash. That sounds like a denial of service, right? So if you are experiencing that, right, that is an example of a security incident, and it affects the availability, right? And maybe, right, as a result of that unavailability, your organization is affected in a way that you cannot make profit, right? People cannot access information, right? People cannot do transaction, right? So it has a bigger impact to the organization from the business perspective as well. The next example is probably something that you are familiar with as well, right? So somebody get an email, it says, oh, there's an attachment called quarterly report, right? And when people click on it, they install a piece of malware. So this is a malware infection. So when you have a malware infection, right, normally there are some other risks that comes with it. Maybe that piece of malware now opens a backdoor for an attacker to continually interact with the computers and maybe see what is inside the network or obtain confidential information from other hosts on the network, for instance, right? And it could be doing, other things as well, like stealing information, stealing data, or the payload of a malware could be encrypting the hard disk and then later on asking for money so that, the hard disk could be decrypted. Another example is could be in the form of, a threat where an attacker obtains sensitive information, right? And now it's threatening you that if you don't pay us money, right, we are going to publish this or we are going to release this, right? So this is again, an example of a security incident. So if you look at some of these examples, there are a few things that I want you to think about. One is the nature of the incident itself, and therefore what do you need to do to prevent such a thing from occurring in the organization. That's one thing. Number two is the actor, right, and the technique of doing, performing a security incident or causing a security incident. And last but not least is the impact, right, the impact of the security incident. And just think for a second, right, in these three examples that I've shown you, what would happen if there is a delay, right, in responding to the incidents, right? So for example, if you do nothing when the website is under attack, what would happen to it? If there's an infection inside the network or the organization and you do nothing about it, what is the risk there? And also in the last example, if you, let's say, don't pay money, right, what would happen, right? So think about the impact or the bigger impact to the organization. So that's the thing when we speak about security incidents. So some more examples. I don't mean to go through this, but just very quickly, there's a lot of discussions today about malware causing financial losses to the organizations, ransomware. I'm sure you have heard of that, where the hard disk, as I said earlier, that the hard disk or the computer is encrypted, you have no access to it, and you don't have any backups. So attacker is asking for money so that you can get the decryption key. There's lots and lots of examples of data breaches in the organization, big and small. I'm sure you have heard about this as well, right? Causing confidential information to be leaked, emails, among people in the organization, now, put in the public domain. Intellectual property lost, if you are working on a product, source code, product design, those things are at risk in some of the data breaches incident that we have seen before. There are also security incidents that were caused as a result of critical vulnerabilities in software that people use, right? And this piece of software is exposed on the internet, or people have ways to access them. And system administrators or people who are taking care of the systems do not patch these critical vulnerabilities on time, or they don't apply workarounds to prevent people from exploiting the vulnerability. So you have a lot of incidents just from the fact that people are not applying patches or getting patch information on a timely basis. DDoS, I've spoken about this earlier, and I think, long story short, if you are interested to find out more about security incidents and the impact of these incidents, I highly recommend that you read the Data Breach Incident Report that is published annually by Verizon. It's a very good source of reference and information. And if you'd like to know about security incidents in different parts of our region, the Asia Pacific region, I also encourage you to check out the APNIC's YouTube page, where we have sessions from previous conferences, such as Apricot or APNIC conferences, and we have the national CERTs from different economies or different countries sharing their incidents that they see or that they observe in their economies. All right, so security incidents, in a nutshell, as I mentioned earlier, that we can look at it from different angles. One is the impact. So you have a security incident, yes, right, a malware infection, but this malware infection could lead to, let's say, disclosure of confidential information. It could affect the system integrity, for instance. Maybe they put backdoors or trojans, so you cannot really trust the system anymore. Maybe there's a keylogger now, right? Everything looks fine, but when you type something on the keyboard, then that piece of malware is recording it and sending it to an attacker. Unauthorized access, so systems that should only be accessed by certain people or certain systems within the organization. And the other views of security incidents, as I mentioned earlier, is the mechanism, right, or the vector, right? So it could be caused through malware infection, or through spam or email or social engineering, or through a web. So you visit a website and that website may contain some exploits that will try to exploit vulnerabilities in the browser or the browser components or some browser plugins, right? Or maybe it's on the network, man-in-the-middle attack, sniffing, that sort of thing. And I think maybe the other thing that I haven't really mentioned is when you look at a security incident or a cybersecurity attack, then also try to think about the actor, the people or the person behind it, right? And what are the motives? Is it for stealing money? Is it for sabotage, right? Is it for shaming, right? Or just, affecting the reputation of the organization? So all of these are in play when we talk about a security incident. So it's not just a, something purely technical where you say that, this is how it works, but also why do people do this, right? So when you start to think about that, then you may also be able to have a more realistic view of cybersecurity, how it affects you as an organization, and what needs to be done to prevent a cybersecurity incident from occurring in the first place. Okay, so what is a CSIRT? So CSIRT is short form for Computer Security Incident Response Team, right? Or in many cases, or in some cases, you may have heard of the word CERT, Computer Emergency Response Team. I've seen some organization use the word CIRT, Computer Incident Response Team. I've seen also where people have used instead of response, so that R is used means also readiness, right? Cyber Emergency Readiness Team. So, I mean, there's variation of it, but the spirit is that this is a unit or a function that deals or responds to a security incident, right? So it performs, coordinates, support security incidents, right, that involve site within a defined constituency. I'll talk about this later on. So a CERT must react to reported security incidents or detected security incidents faced by the constituency, right? So in a way, it's reactive, but as we will see later on, that there are also other proactive components to this. And generally, right, in many organizations, normally this function is performed by a group of people, so a team, right? So that's why you see the word team there. However, of course, if you don't have a team, then we are also talking about this capability, that you must have this capability. There must be some policies, some procedures in place to define how you will react or deal with a computer security incident. Next. Now, what is a constituency? So basically, CSIRT serves a constituent, right? So there are stakeholders, right? And the stakeholder defines sometimes, what is the purpose or nature of the CSIRT, who is the CSIRT serving, what security incidents they handle, what can they do about a particular security incident, what they can't do, the relationship with other CSIRTs, and so on and so forth. So, in my experience of dealing with a lot of CERTs or CSIRTs, I find that there are many types of CSIRTs. Right? There are CSIRT that only serve a single organization. Right? So let's say there is a bank and there is a bank CERT, and the CSIRT will basically deal with computer security incidents involving the banks and the customer. I've seen also sector-based CSIRT, where a CSIRT is established to help a particular sector, let's say the financial sector or the energy sector or the ISP sector. And the sector-based CSIRT tend to do coordination with other CSIRTs within organizations in that sector, or sometimes it leads the investigation, or it gets reports and do some analysis to support CSIRT-related activities. It could be product-based, right? And this is very common in IT companies or companies that have products. So, for example, companies like Cisco or Juniper, right? They have the product CSIRT, Cisco PCERT, for example. You have national or country level CERTs, right? So in our region, so you have organizations like JP-CERT or MyCERT, that's Malaysia CERT, ID-CERT or Thai-CERT. So these are all national level CERTs. And they work with a bunch of other CERTs, and they also work on many other issues, right? Not just incident response, but also creating awareness and whatnot. Or it could be serving a specific, customer base, right? So organizations that have customers or clients, sometimes also they have a function where they also assist in responding to incidents experienced by the customers, right? So again, the bank or the banking sector is a good example of this. So when it comes to constituencies, right, sometimes there are some overlapping, and therefore when we talk about the CSIRT world or CSIRT community, right, there's a lot of coordination, right, on the roles and responsibilities. So some form of understanding must be there. There's also this thing when you talk about CSIRT that is called CSIRT of the last resort. So let's say, for example, I have an incident, and the incident is affecting a country with no national CSIRT, right? So I need to contact someone there, but I don't know anybody in that particular country to help me with takedowns and so on and so forth, right? So I will try to find somebody, right, who can help me, and they may not be a CERT or CSIRT. However, they have this function that can, help to do maybe things like takedown or some investigation or to provide more information. So we call this a CSIRT of the last resort, right? So at the end of the day, when you have an incident, it means that you need to be able to reach out to somebody, right? Somebody who have a clue, somebody who with authority, somebody with a mandate, so that you can prevent this incident from getting worse. So something to think about. Okay, so I've gone through this example earlier, but this is just to group them into something more familiar to you. So enterprise CSIRTs, national coordination centers, analysis center. So organization, I'm not sure if you have heard of FSISAC, for instance, is an analysis center for the financial sector, where they synthesize data coming from various resources and then present them to the membership to say that this is a threat that we are seeing, this is the indicators of compromise, you can use this information to improve your defense, that sort of thing. Vendor teams, right, companies or service providers normally have a CSIRT. So even huge big organizations like Google or Facebook, they will have a CERT that will respond to incidents affecting their clients or customers. Then, of course, you also have people who provide incident response services, right? So there's a company, managed security services, consulting firms that also do this kind of work, because in reality, you have organizations, maybe they are not big enough, or they want to specialize in their core competencies, and therefore they outsource the incident response work to another organization. But of course, even if you outsource this function, you need to have very good understanding, both of the business or the service provider and the organization must have very good understanding of how things work, what are the information assets, how the organizations will be impacted by a security incident, so that they can provide timely response, they can provide contextual response, right? And they can also help to defend the organization in the long run. So these are different kinds of CSIRTs. And the next thing that I want to cover is why a CSIRT. So I guess the answer must be obvious by now. In today's day and age, you can't live securely 100% of time. There are many variables, right? So maybe even if you do everything right, there will be some software vulnerability that you need to patch, right? So even if you do everything right, there might be lapse in the process where you may leave a system vulnerable, and so on and so forth, right? Even if you do everything right, the bad guys are always working hard to find new ways to breach a system, or to make new exploits, or to infect the computer, or social engineering, right? So we live in an age where security incidents tend to happen, so you have to deal with it. So having a CERT means that you will have the proper procedures, capabilities in place to deal with security incidents. And in a way, if you are an organization, your stakeholders, customers, for instance, have an assurance that you take security very seriously. Right? A CSIRT is also very important, as we said earlier, for mitigating or minimizing the impact of an incident. So you have an incident, yes, you have to accept that, but you want to minimize the impact or the damage of this particular incident, right? So one aspect of this is, for example, having a known point of contact. If somebody know that there is a security incident affecting your organization, right, then they can quickly notify you so that you can take action. Or if you have make the relevant preparation in place, right, the detection mechanism and whatnot, you detect an attempt of an attack, for example, then you can be more alert and start watching, right, and being more prepared to deal with a particular incident. Having plans for mitigating damages as a result of a security incident is also part of the governance, the IT governance, right? So it ensures business continuity. It ensures that you have a backup plan, right? It ensures that you have invested resources to deal with security incidents and to protect your information assets. Another reason why organizations have CSIRTs today is that it is required as a compliance requirement. Standards are they are implementing some kind of standards, such as ISO 27001, ITIL, or it is a requirement by the regulators that you must have these capabilities. You must have an incident response team in specializing to deal with security incidents in the organization. And I think there are other points there, security improvements. I think it's clear cut what it means. But also, if you have a dedicated team, it means that you can have dedicated services and skills, right? Because sometimes the nature of the work is slightly different. You have to have people who are very familiar with the network, or have abilities to do forensics, malware analysis, and whatnot. So this person can actually specialize and therefore be more optimized in terms of giving support when you need him. And of course, you can come up with specialized policies and so on. Okay, so that's why it's CERT. Now, just to give you some example, so at APNIC, we are a membership-driven organization. So we register who we allocate resources to, and when we register information about organization who take resources from us, you have their contact information, their address, the network block. One of the element that is required, right? One of the information that is required in this registry, in the Whois database, is what we call the IRT object, the the incident response team object, right? And this is there so that when you are dealing with an incident and you look at the source of the incident in terms of like network packets, for instance, and you see that, oh, it comes from this particular network block, right? So I want to notify the owner of this network or the holder of this resource about this particular incident, so that one, he can stop, or he or she can stop the incident. Number two, maybe do a bit more investigation, or just provide some information for further analysis, for instance. So this information is required even in the Whois database, so that when you have a security incident, you can easily reach out to, right? Reach out to the parties concerned, right? The target or the source. And I'm sure you have seen similar database, which is the name database, right? So for domain names, there's a separate Whois database. And that information in that database can also be useful when you need to reach out to somebody, right, about a security incident. And this brings back my point to you as an organization. If there is a security incident, let's say on a weekend, right, your website, hopefully this will not happen, the website of your organization gets defaced. Somebody, managed to get into the server, there's a vulnerability somehow, and they changed, the page. And customers will be going to this website and noticing this. And if you have not detected it, right, how then will the customers reach out to the responsible parties within your organization, right, so that you can take action immediately, right? How can they reach out to you? How can they notify you, right, on the incident that have to be taken care of immediately? for instance. So the use of Whois database providing contact information is basically part and parcel of the CSIRT CSIRT world. I want to share with you, for example, this is a member database of FIRST. So FIRST is the Forum of Incident Response and Security Teams. It is an association of CSIRTs and CERTs from around the world. If you have a CERT, you don't have to be a member of FIRST. But a lot of the CSIRTs from around the world value the fact that we can work together as a community, and therefore they subscribe to FIRST or become a FIRST member so that they can share information and contact. So that's a different story, though. What I wanted to show you here is that this is a CERT from the Bangladesh eGov, so Bangladesh e-government organization. They have a CERT, and you can just look at the information that they are providing, right? So they say that these are our phone numbers, fax. This is the way you can contact us. Our email address, right? Time zone, right? Time zone is very, very important, so that people who are trying to report something to you is aware that, these guys might be sleeping at the moment, so I don't expect an answer immediately, or I will expect an answer in the next 2 hours or 3 hours, or this is the right time to contact them, right? So very detailed information about the availability of the CSIRT, how to reach them outside working hours or on holidays, for instance, if you can see that line there. Their constituency, they say we are government, so any incidents involving the government or the military in this particular case, you can contact us. And internet addresses and AS number they are responsible for, and also PGP. So PGP in the CSIRT community, PGP is being used widely for securing communication, right? To encrypt contents that I want to only be available to you, right? So this is a PGP key. If you need to encrypt something to us, use this particular key. So that's an example of information about CSIRT and how the components that I mentioned earlier about constituency, but availability is being described on this page. Now, before we go further, let me spend maybe 1 or 2 minutes to talk a little bit about the incident response lifecycle. So when you have a security incident, right, then there are a few things that you have to be aware of, right? And the whole process or the whole life cycle does not start when you have an incident, right? So our first goal should be preventing incidents from happening in the first place, right? Preventing the frequency of incidents, right? By hardening our network, applying patches, have security controls. That's why you have to do all the security risk assessment and management, as I mentioned earlier, why you have to have a cybersecurity framework so that you identify all of your assets, identify the points where traffic comes in, have a policy of patch management for patching systems or critical systems, monitoring, that sort of thing. So that's in the preparation, and part of the preparation as well is to prepare for a security incident, right? And this is where you have security policies, identify the resources, set up the infrastructure, and so on. Number 2 is detection and analysis. So detecting the incident either by getting people to report to you right now, hey, this is our point of contact. You have a security incident. Let us know. Or you have things in place inside the organization, maybe an intrusion detection system or firewall or some other system that collects logs, and you pull this in one location and you do some analysis on them to see if there is malicious traffic going out of the organization, if there are attempts to attack systems that belongs to you, or some funny or suspicious activities on the network. So detecting and performing analysis is very critical, right? So that you are aware, you have contextual awareness, situational awareness of what is going on. And part of detection is knowing what is also happening elsewhere, right? Because an attack might happen to one organization and it may also impact you. So getting information, threat intelligence information that will support you to do better analysis and better detection is also part of this incident response framework, right? And then, of course, if you have a real incident, right, you must have a strategy to contain the incident or eradicate, and of course recover, right? Because that incident may cause damage to the organization, and you need to recover quickly. Business must go on, right? You need to operate the next day. You don't want to, incur any more losses. You may want to, because of the incident, assure the customers that this will not happen again. We have done our best. We have learned our lesson, and as a result, we are doing the following, right? And that also comes in the post-incident activity, right? Improvements, analysis, identifying the gaps, developing countermeasures, applying lessons learned from the incident, right? And this continues all the time, right? And I think in today's day and age, this is not an option anymore. You don't deal with an incident and you forget about them. You have to continually, look into preparing, detection, analysis, containing the incident if it happens, right? And learning from it, applying, fixes. Now, let's go into some components of a CSIRT. We've spoken about the need to have policies and SOPs. So obviously, at the organizational level, there must be a high-level policy on how we deal with security incident, right? So normally in this policy, it mentioned things like, you must report, right? Any security incident, don't hide it, don't put it, slip it under the carpet. You must investigate, right? You must communicate with perhaps external parties if it's very, very critical, or if it has criminal element, right? So you have to report to a law enforcement authority, for instance. So normally that is being defined in some high-level policy, right? What's the scope of of the incident response? What are we trying to protect, and so on and so forth. So within the policies and the SOPs, there are definitions of roles and responsibilities, what needs to be done. So the operational procedures tend to be more specific in terms of the steps. But I think what we want to get out of this whole thing is, one, what is the overall policy when it comes to dealing with security incidents, right? What is expected? And number two, when it comes to the task, right? How do we prioritize? How do we, for example, allocate resources? What is the authority, the mandate? So sometimes in an organization, when there is a security incident, you have to deal with different departments, right? And everybody have to cooperate and collaborate. So when you have policies and procedures in place, all of this thing is being defined beforehand, before the incident, right? So you don't have to argue that, who are you, or we don't want to provide this information to you, and so on and so forth. I said earlier that, part of the policies is trying to define in advance, right, the kind of collaboration that you can have with external parties. Of course, when you have a security incident, some information can be very, very sensitive. And in many cases, organizations are not comfortable in sharing this information. So what is the rules of engagement, right? How do we get this assurance that this information will not be, for example, leaked to the media? So that sort of thing. That kind of understanding is very, very important, in working out the policies and procedures. The second thing is that an incident could also easily escalate into a crisis, right? If it's not being managed properly, or you don't have capabilities, or you realize too late, right? And therefore, you need to define, that escalation, how things will be escalated, who's going to be handling it, right? And the other parties that will now get involved as a result of a crisis. So I can think of many examples in which, an attack is very persistent and is causing a lot of damage, and the organization have to, report to a regulator because it is part of the requirement, right? So make sure that, that checklist is in place somewhere. And not only that, sometimes when you have an incident, right, that incident can become public knowledge, right? So media picks it up, it's on TV, the hackers or the bad guys are tweeting about it or posting it on their Facebook page, so it becomes common knowledge, right? And therefore now customers and stakeholders are asking questions. Is this real? What are you doing to protect us? How are you preventing this from getting worse? That sort of thing. So you must have a strategy, or you have somebody in place to be able to communicate with the media, right, and send the right message, and assure the customers that everything should be under control. We're trying our best to put things under control, right? So easily, a security incident, like I said earlier, can become into a crisis, and it now requires the involvement of other parties within the organization and also outside the organization, right? Sometimes even the legal departments are involved, right? When it comes to, if it affects contracts, it affects SLAs, it affects privacy of customers, that sort of thing. So a lot of people, right? A lot of different entities within the organization must be aware of, not only security but also the incident management process and what are their roles and responsibility. Okay, so that's a bit about policies and procedures. Now, structure, right? So, ideally, if you can afford the resources, there should be more than one person managing the incident, right? Security incident. And in many organizations, different organizations, they have different team models. I've seen a central incident response team where this is a big organization, and each subsidiary, for example, each branch will have their own team, and they report to a single entity. Or in the case of coordination centers, like a national CSIRT, where they work with a lot of other CSIRTs, right? So in a way, you have this central model where everybody works on their own domain, but from time to time, they will have to share to the central, incident response team. Or put it in another way, some enterprise, they can lend or give resources to work as a team when required, right? And if there is no incident at the moment, they go back to their own day-to-day operations. You have distributed incident response team, right? This incident response teams in different locations, right? Because of the nature of the organization. There is also a coordination team, which means that they don't really do the operational work that much, but they coordinate information, alerts, feeds, or escalation. They become the point of contact, right, for the rest when it comes to dealing with external parties and so on and so forth. So there are various team models that exist, within the incident response team structure itself. Of course, you've seen the incident response lifecycle, right? But there are also other sub-functions that you have to think about. The incident reporting, right? How do we handle from the initial reporting to performing analysis or triage, and then escalating it to specialist, and then you close the case, right? And come up with recommendations, report, and mitigation strategies, and so on and so forth, right? So that's one piece. The analysis itself, what is happening, the impact, the patterns. So definitely, when it comes to doing incident analysis, you need individuals or expertise in various areas in cyber or in IT space, right? It could be OS, network, wireless, mobile, Android, that sort of thing, databases. So a lot of knowledge accumulation or expected in performing analysis, especially when it comes to security incident analysis. And of course, the strategy for responding to a particular incident. What do we do, right? What is the ideal thing that we do, right? What can we do now temporarily? So there are there's all of that when it comes to dealing with a security incident. How do you deal with the incident, short term, long term, right? And of course, lessons learned after that, and how do we avoid this whole thing from reoccurring in the future? Now, as I said earlier, that sometimes you have a CSIRT that does more than just incident response, right? Even if you look at the incident lifecycle, there's a lot of things that you can do before incident happen, right? So the preparation and so on. So incident response is definitely the core of the activities, but there are a lot of teams out there that does more than that, right? So they also releases advisory from time to time, especially warning people or warning organizations or other entities about a particular incident, right, or a particular threat, like be careful, right, or there's a critical vulnerability in this particular software, the patch is available, please apply patches now, right? Or we are seeing this fraud incident increasing, or more and more people being targeted by this particular phishing email. Be careful, don't click on it. If you receive this email, let us know. That sort of thing. So that's advisory. And of course, you can do education and awareness to the organization, to individuals, to other teams or departments, so that they are more aware about security and security incidents. There's also active information sharing that can be done from time to time about the latest threats, the latest actor, what they do, the latest attacks. So a lot of information sharing can be done by the CERT, right? And before you can do information sharing, you have to actually try to get to know, the other parties, the community, right? So that they can trust you before sharing information with you. So of course, there's a lot of other things that a CSIRT can do. Things that are proactive services, like doing risk assessment or doing scans from time to time to alert the rightful parties about protecting their infrastructure and the network. If you want to find out more about this, right, there's a whole, other services that a CSIRT is known to provide. So I'd highly recommend that you check out this document. It's called the First CSIRT Services Framework, which was done or developed by the first community. I'll give you a better idea of what CSIRTs can do. This is an example of an enterprise CSIRT, entity CERT, which belongs to an organization in Japan, right? So they provide all of the services. Obviously, they are a well-resourced CSIRT. So they perform some proactive services, some reactive services there, and what they call security quality management services, consulting, education, training, even evaluation of new technology. It's very interesting. All right, so I just have a few more minutes left, so I'm going to run down very quickly. So on a few other topics. So one is the tools and facilities of a CERT. So to be able to have this capability and again to operationalize the team, then definitely you need some tools and facilities for the CSIRT. So what we are saying here is that you need a dedicated facilities, you need certain type of tools to perform your analysis, to do incident response work, and generally, there are tools that you need for managing incident reports, like some form of a ticketing system where you can capture your workflow in there, from ticketing the incident to an analyst looking at it, providing the report, escalating it, and then maybe closing the case and notifying people who reported the case, or producing the report itself for later assessment. And another category of tools that is needed, or facility that is needed, is the tools and facilities for doing the actual investigation. So if you need to do packet analysis, you need some tools for doing that. If you need to do reverse engineering on a piece of malware, you need some tools for that. You need to have access to databases that contains information about other CERTs, other domain names, other organizations. You need access to maybe sandboxes for executing some suspicious executables, that sort of thing. So we don't have time to cover about all of the tools, and again, it depends on the services that you perform. Some, if you perform this yourself, then you must have this tool and have the knowledge to operate these tools. If you don't perform it, then at least you know how it works, and you can expect the outcomes if somebody performed the analysis for you better. So more information about this in the reference that I've put here on this slide to give you an idea of what is expected of a CSIRT. So the last thing that I want to talk about when it comes to a CSIRT, and this is a very, very important point, is that normally CSIRT do not work in isolation, and therefore cooperation is normally required, right? At least in terms of information sharing or asking for a favor. for a particular action to be taken, right? We'll touch a bit more on this in one of the scenario later on. So having cooperation, interaction is very important, but also at the same time, it is very important how we disclose information with one another, right? So we also do not want things that are not relevant to the incident to be shared. Anything related to the organization, confidential information. But also, before establishing cooperation and interaction, you have to get to know, right, the other entities, right? So try to find opportunities to get to know others. Normally, if you ask me, I say that try to attend the CSIRT or CERT events. Then you meet other CSIRT, get to know them, start exchanging emails, get onto some mailing list or some association of CSIRTs mailing list, right? So that's one way. But also, being aware of who you need to contact to when you have a security incident or when you need to escalate something is also very critical from the very beginning. So we've covered this a bit, I think, previously in the preparation bit. So in the security response community is also actively, sharing information, helping one another, and basically the most important element here is the trust, right? So before I can share something with you, I need to really make sure that you are, number one, entitled to this piece of information, right? Number two, that you will not abuse it, right? Or, put it in a public space, for instance, because this is only, let's say, on a need-to-know basis or for your further action type of thing. So there's a lot of community interaction, as I said earlier, in this domain. And there is active sharing of, vulnerability information, indicators of compromise, like IP addresses associated with malicious activities, or file hashes related to malware, or some other types of indicators. Let's say that if you find a service with a port, this is just for example, port open on 4417. This is known to be related to this piece of malware. So if you scan your network and you find this port, then you say, oh, maybe I'm affected by this piece of software. So there's a lot of sharing like that, of which you can actually use it for your own benefit, right? But the trick is to get into this community, right, and to get this information. So people share a lot of reports, a lot of analysis as well, so that you can actually learn from it. And lately, there is a lot of discussion as well on how best to share this information, right? Of course, if you do it via email, it may not scale, or it may not, allow you to protect confidentiality of such information. So people have established standards as well as tools and platforms for sharing this. So I just want to mention one or two here, and you can look it up afterwards. One is called MISP, the Malware Information Sharing Platform for Threat Sharing. Look it up, right? It's being developed by the community, for sharing threat intelligence, threat information, and it is actively being used today. Another standards that maybe I want to mention quickly, if you look at the list there, it says STIX and TAXI, right? So these are standards, again, for protocols for allowing for sharing information, so that tools can be built to use these standards, right? So look it up, and this is what comes out from the discussion in the community about information exchange. So it's very, very interesting subject. The security community has also been working on, let's say, coordinated takedowns, for instance, like the Configure and DNS Changer Working Group. That's a very old example, and I'm sure you've heard of collaboration between, let's say, big organizations, Interpol, Europol, to take down a particular gang or criminal organization that is stealing money, stealing resources from others. So there's a lot of close collaboration between many entities who are in this domain, right? And maybe one day, if you have a CSIRT, you can also get involved in some of this work. And of course, keep your eye open for such communities. So in our region, for instance, we have the APCIRT, the Asia Pacific Computer Emergency Response Team. I've mentioned first. There is TFC CERT in Europe, Africa CERT in Africa, and many other communities like this that you can participate and join. So the cost of operating a CSIRT, I guess by now you may have realized that there's a lot of things that you need to have in place. not just the human resources, but also the technologies, the policy making, and so on and so forth. So therefore, a lot of resources are involved in here. So one of the favorite questions that I get is, how much do I need? So I'm not able to answer that question, or I cannot answer that question easily, because it depends on a lot of things, right? It depends on the size of the team, services provided. So more services you provide, the more you probably need. And skills, the tool availability, whether you use commercial tools or open source, that sort of thing. But I mean, the point here is that it will definitely cost some money. So it is an investment as well to deter security incidents from occurring in the organization, to keep customers happy, to keep business running. So it is an investment for all of that, right? And we said earlier, this is part of the overall risk management for the organization. If you want to find more information about this, I propose that you check out this paper from IGF, the Best Practice Forum for CSIRT. So there are some discussion about cost of operating a CSIRT that other people have shared. Maybe something that you want to look at. All right, so I think I'm a bit over time now, and I probably have time to maybe look at one scenario or share one scenario with you, so that we can sort of recap what we have learned today and apply it on an incident. So let's look at one of the incidents. But before that, when you look at this incident, I want you to think about, how would you handle this incident if it occurred in your organization? What are the tasks involved, and how would you prioritize the task? And think about, what kind of tools that you need to perform analysis or skills. If you need assistance, and in most cases you probably need some assistance, who would you contact, right? And if you are contacted by NVIDIA, what would you tell them? And what are some of the post-incident activities you would do as a result of this incident, right? So let's pick one. Okay, let's pick this one then. It's a data breach incident, right? So let's say one day you have learned that some information, right, belonging to your organization has been published on the internet, right? So let's say you come into the picture here when somebody told you that, hey, this company information, this confidential company information is now available on this particular website. Somebody has published it, right? So you've done some investigation, right? You've done some investigation, and it turns out that, that information did not magically just turn up there, right? It is as a result of, an infection, malware infection on the CEO's laptop. And again, that's probably a symptom, right? That's what you can see, but that malware infection actually came from an email, right, that contains a malicious attachment, right? So email comes to the CEO or whoever is checking the CEO's email. Email looks, very convincing with an attachment. Somebody clicked on it, CEO clicked on it, right? And it has an exploit, a vulnerability on a computer, right? Which means that computer may not be up to date. There is no, malware protection on it, or, your spam filter has not been working to filter out this email from coming to the mailbox in the first place, right? And upon infection, right, not only confidential information is being sent out to the attacker, right, but also this computer is also communicating or have, communication with a controller, right, outside the organization, right? So you have to check your logs for outgoing traffic, and you see, oh, there is also a connection, and from time to time the computer here is receiving commands from this controller, right? So there's a lot of things going on here, right? From a simple detection, a mere detection that information is being published, right? And of course, like we said earlier, when you have an incident like this, it impacts the organization. So there's a few things here. If I were to ask you to think about, what would be your priorities? Like, what will you do first? And then what are the other things that you need to do, right? To eliminate this problem, right? Eradicate, right? To recover, right? and to maybe try to get some assurance that this is only one infection and not more than one within the organization, right? So how would you go about doing that? And I think from this particular picture as well, there's a lot of things to do. Number one, maybe there are different expertise that are required, some of which maybe you can do yourself, some maybe you require an external expert to help you with, but also within the organization, what other entities or departments are involved now, right? So we have confidential information being published. We have an infection ongoing. We need to have somebody to look at the outgoing, outbound traffic or logs to see if there are some other infection, right? You need to talk with IT, right? Maybe there are other computers in the network who are at the same patch level, right? So they could be at risk too. Who else got this email? So you need to check that as well. So there's a lot of work, right? Just by looking at this particular scenario, and therefore, right, what I'm trying to say here is that you need to have the resources, you need to have the procedures in place, so you know exactly what to do in a situation like this. You can also have your priorities, listed and known in advance. So, for example, in this particular case, maybe one of your interests is to request, whoever owns this server that is hosting the website to remove this content, right? Because it shouldn't be out there in the first place. And of course, what if they don't take down the content for you? What would you do, right? Who else would you, talk to ask for help, right? And let's say, for example, this server is in another country, for instance, right? In a different time zone and speak language that you don't speak. So who can you ask for help? So these are the things that I want you to think about when you think about this particular incident, and think about some of the points that have been mentioned earlier. So I have actually two other scenarios that we don't have time for this, but it's available on the slide. So this is an example of a DDoS threat. Phishing is also another common problem today. Where organizations or where criminals try to fish credentials. credentials from users uh, from a particular organization